The small leather journal bounced against Private Emma Walsh's hip as she walked through the corridors of Naval Base Meridian at exactly 6:45 a.m. The morning sun cast long shadows through the narrow windows, and the sound of her boots echoed off the polished floors. She clutched the journal tightly, knowing that if any of her fellow sailors saw it, she would face another round of mockery and cruel jokes. Emma had been keeping the journal for 3 months now, ever since she arrived at the base fresh out of basic training. What had started as a simple way to record her thoughts and experiences had grown into something much more detailed and complex. Every day, she wrote down everything she observed, every conversation she overheard, every small detail that seemed important or interesting. The other sailors thought it was ridiculous. Petty Officer Jake Morrison had discovered the journal 2 weeks ago when Emma accidentally dropped it in the mess hall. He had picked it up, flipped through a few pages, and started reading aloud in a mocking voice that drew the attention of everyone nearby. Day 47, Jake had read with exaggerated drama, noticed that the security cameras in Sector 3 seemed to have a blind spot near the northeast corner. The guards change shifts at exactly 2:15 a.m., and there's always a 3-minute gap in coverage. Jake had looked up with a smirk. "What are you, Walsh, planning a prison break?" The laughter that followed had made Emma's cheeks burn with embarrassment. She had snatched the journal back and hurried away, but the damage was done. Word spread quickly through the base that the weird new girl was writing down every tiny detail like some kind of obsessive spy. Seaman Rebecca Torres had been particularly cruel about it. "Maybe she's writing love letters to herself," Rebecca had suggested loudly during lunch the next day. "Dear Diary, today nobody talked to me again because I'm too busy scribbling in my little book to make any real friends." The teasing had only gotten worse from there. Whenever Emma pulled out her journal to write something down, sailors would make exaggerated shushing sounds or pretend to whisper secrets. "Better watch what you say," they would joke. "Walsh is taking notes for her memoirs." But Emma kept writing anyway. She couldn't explain why it felt so important to record everything she saw and heard. It wasn't that she was trying to spy on anyone or get people in trouble. She just had this compulsion to notice things, to pay attention to details that others seemed to miss, and to write them down before she forgot. Her journal contained observations about everything from the weather patterns around the base to the habits of individual sailors. She noted which guards fell asleep during night shifts, which officers had affairs with subordinates, which supply clerks were skimming materials to sell on the black market. She wrote about the small mechanical problems that maintenance crews ignored, the security weaknesses that nobody seemed to care about, and the patterns of behavior that revealed deeper truths about how the base really operated. Captain William Hayes had been commanding Naval Base Meridian for 2 years, and he prided himself on running a tight ship. He was a career naval officer with 23 years of service, a man who believed in discipline, order, and attention to detail. His subordinates respected him, though many also feared his sharp temper and intolerance for mistakes. At exactly 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late October, Captain Hayes was reviewing security reports in his office when his aide, Lieutenant Mark Stevens, knocked on the door. "Come in," Hayes called without looking up from his paperwork. Stevens entered and stood at attention. "Sir, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. There's been a security breach in the communications center." Hayes looked up sharply. The communications center was one of the most secure areas of the base, containing sensitive equipment and classified information. Any breach there was a serious matter that could have national security implications. "What kind of breach?" Hayes asked, already reaching for his cap. "Unknown person or persons gained access to the secure server room sometime between 11:45 p.m. last night and 5:30 a.m. this morning," Stevens reported. "They didn't take any equipment, but several classified files were accessed on the main terminal." Hayes felt his blood pressure rising. A security breach of this magnitude could end careers, including his own. "Have you identified the perpetrator?" "Not yet, sir. The security cameras in that section malfunctioned around midnight and didn't come back online until dawn. We're reviewing all personnel who had access to the area during that time frame. Hayes stood up and began packing behind his desk. I want every person who had access to that area last night brought in for questioning. Check their backgrounds, their recent activities, their financial records. Someone with access sold us out, and I want to know who. Over the next 6 hours, Hayes and his security team questioned 17 different personnel who had been on duty or had access to the communications center. They examined duty rosters, reviewed security footage from other areas of the base, and ran background checks on anyone who might have had motive to steal classified information. But by 2:30 p.m., they were no closer to identifying the culprit. The investigation was stalling, and Hayes was growing increasingly frustrated. He knew that his superiors at Naval Command would expect answers soon, and he didn't have any to give them. Lieutenant Stevens knocked on his door again. "Sir, we've completed interviews with all personnel who had official access to the communications center last night. None of them show any obvious signs of deception or suspicious behavior." Hayes rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. What about unofficial access? Could someone have gotten in without authorization? "That's what we're trying to figure out, sir. The security system shows no unauthorized entry attempts, but as I mentioned, the cameras were down for several hours." Hayes stared out his office window at the base courtyard below. Sailors were going about their daily routines, most of them unaware of the crisis unfolding in the command center. "Stevens, I want you to expand the investigation. Question everyone who was on the base last night, regardless of their clearance level or assigned duties. Someone saw something, and I want to know what it was." Stevens nodded and left to carry out the order. Hayes remained at his window, watching the activity below and wondering how someone had managed to breach his supposedly secure facility. At exactly 4:15 p.m., Hayes was reviewing incident reports when Stevens returned with a peculiar expression on his face. "Sir, I have something that might interest you. One of the sailors we interviewed mentioned that Private Walsh keeps a detailed journal of daily observations. According to several sources, she writes down everything she sees and hears on the base." Hayes frowned. "Walsh, I don't recognize the name." "She's new, sir. Been here about 3 months. Communications specialist, stationed in the Technical Support Division. No security clearance beyond basic level." "And you think her journal might contain relevant information?" Stevens shrugged. "It's worth checking, sir. According to the other sailors, she notices things that most people miss. They say she's obsessive about recording details." Hayes considered this for a moment. It seemed unlikely that a junior sailor with no special access would have information relevant to a security breach in the communications center. But at this point, he was willing to pursue any lead, no matter how remote. "Bring her in," Hayes ordered, "and have her bring that journal." Emma was working at her desk in the technical support office when Stevens appeared and informed her that Captain Hayes wanted to see her immediately. Her heart began racing as she tried to think of what she might have done wrong. She grabbed her journal from her desk drawer, as Stevens had instructed, and followed him through the corridors to the command center. The captain's office was larger and more intimidating than Emma had expected. Hayes sat behind a massive wooden desk, his expression stern and unreadable. The walls were covered with commendations, photographs of naval vessels, and maps of the surrounding coastal region. "Private Walsh," Hayes said as she stood at attention, "I understand you keep a journal of your observations around the base." Emma felt her cheeks begin to burn. "Yes, sir. It's just personal notes, sir. Nothing official or important." Hayes extended his hand. "I'd like to take a look at it." Emma hesitated for a moment, knowing that her journal contained criticisms of various personnel and observations that some might consider nosy or inappropriate. But she couldn't refuse a direct order from the base commander, so she reluctantly handed over the leather-bound book. Hayes opened the journal to a random page and began reading. His expression remained neutral at first, but as he continued reading, Emma noticed his eyebrows beginning to rise. He flipped to another section, then another, reading more intently with each page. "Private Walsh," Hayes said after several minutes of silence. "These observations are quite detailed. You've documented security routines, personnel habits, maintenance schedules, and facility vulnerabilities with remarkable precision." Emma wasn't sure if this was a compliment or an accusation. "Sir, I just noticed things. I didn't mean any harm by writing them down." Hayes continued reading, occasionally making small sounds of surprise or interest. Emma stood at attention, growing more nervous with each passing minute. She watched his face for clues about what he was thinking, but the captain's expression remained carefully controlled. Finally, Hayes looked up at her. "Private Walsh, according to your journal entry from last night, you observed suspicious activity near the communications center. Can you tell me about that?" Emma's mind raced as she tried to remember what she had written. "Sir, I was returning from the mess hall around 11:50 p.m. when I noticed someone near the northeast entrance to the communications building. It struck me as odd because that entrance is rarely used, especially at night." Hayes leaned forward in his chair. "Did you recognize who it was?" "Not clearly, sir. The lighting in that area is poor, and I was about 50 yards away. But I noted that it was someone in enlisted uniform, average height, carrying what looked like a small toolkit or equipment bag." Hayes flipped through the journal pages, looking for the entry Emma was describing. When he found it, he read it carefully, his expression growing more serious. "According to your notes," Hayes said, "you observed this person spending approximately 15 minutes near the northeast entrance, then moving around to the service access panel on the east side of the building. You also noted that the security camera in that area appeared to be malfunctioning." Emma nodded. "Yes, sir. The camera housing was pointing in the wrong direction, like someone had adjusted it manually. I made a note to report it to security this morning, but then I heard about the investigation and figured it might be related." Hayes set the journal down on his desk and looked at Emma with newfound respect. "Private Walsh, your observations may have just solved a major security breach investigation. The person you saw was likely our perpetrator, and your detailed notes provide the most concrete lead we've had all day." Emma felt a mix of relief and confusion. "Sir, I don't understand. How do my notes help identify the person?" Hayes smiled for the first time since the interview began. "Your journal doesn't just contain observations about last night. It contains 3 months of detailed notes about personnel behavior, security routines, and base operations. Looking at your entries, I can see patterns and correlations that my investigators missed." Hayes opened the journal to an earlier section. "For example, you noted that Petty Officer Martin Fletcher has been working unusual late-night shifts for the past 2 weeks. You also observed that he's been having financial difficulties, based on overheard conversations about gambling debts. And you documented that he has access to the communications center through his work in the electrical maintenance division." Emma's eyes widened as she realized what the captain was suggesting. "Sir, you think Petty Officer Fletcher was the person I saw last night?" Hayes was already reaching for his phone. "Lieutenant Stevens, I need you to locate Petty Officer Fletcher immediately and bring him in for questioning. Also, check his financial records and recent activities off base." After giving the order, Hayes turned back to Emma. "Private Walsh, I owe you an apology. Your fellow sailors may have mocked your journal-keeping habits, but those same habits have provided crucial intelligence that my trained investigators overlooked." Emma stood quietly, still processing the fact that her obsessive note-taking had actually proven valuable. "Sir, I never intended to spy on anyone or gather intelligence. I just notice things and write them down." Hayes nodded. "That's exactly what makes your observations so valuable. You weren't looking for anything specific, so you noticed everything. Your journal is like a 3-month surveillance report covering the entire base." Over the next hour, Hayes continued reading through Emma's journal while they waited for Fletcher to be brought in for questioning. The entries painted a detailed picture of life on the base that was far more comprehensive than any official report Hayes had ever received. Emma had documented everything from minor safety violations to major security weaknesses, from personnel conflicts to potential criminal activity. She had noted which sailors were struggling with personal problems, which officers were abusing their authority, and which systems were failing or being neglected. At 5:47 p.m., Lieutenant Stevens returned with news that confirmed Hayes's suspicions. Petty Officer Fletcher had been found attempting to leave the base with a bag containing stolen classified documents. When confronted, he had confessed to the security breach and revealed that he had been selling information to pay off gambling debts to dangerous creditors. Hayes closed Emma's journal and looked at her with genuine admiration. "Private Walsh, your attention to detail and dedication to recording your observations have prevented a serious compromise of national security. Fletcher would likely have continued selling classified information if you hadn't provided the key insights that led to his identification." Emma felt overwhelmed by the praise. After months of being mocked and dismissed by her fellow sailors, it was surreal to hear the base commander calling her work valuable and important. "Sir," Emma said hesitantly, "what happens now? Will I get in trouble for recording information about base operations without authorization?" Hayes considered the question carefully. "Private Walsh, your journal demonstrates exceptional observational skills and analytical thinking. Rather than punishing you, I'm considering how best to utilize your talents officially. Would you be interested in transferring to intelligence analysis?" Emma's heart began racing with excitement. Intelligence analysis was exactly the kind of work that matched her natural inclinations and interests. "Yes, sir. I would be very interested in that opportunity." Hayes made a note on his desk pad. "I'll speak with personnel about arranging the transfer. In the meantime, I want you to continue keeping your journal, but I want you to report directly to Lieutenant Stevens with any observations that might be relevant to base security." Over the following weeks, Emma's life changed dramatically. Her transfer to intelligence analysis was approved, and she found herself working with a team of professionals who appreciated her eye for detail and her ability to spot patterns that others missed. The other sailors' attitudes toward her changed as well. Word had spread that her silly journal had helped solve a major security breach and prevent further espionage. Petty Officer Morrison, who had once mocked her note-taking, approached her with a grudging apology. "Walsh," he said awkwardly, "I guess I owe you an apology for giving you grief about your journal. Turns out you were doing something pretty important after all." Emma accepted the apology graciously, though she couldn't help but feel vindicated after months of ridicule and dismissal. She continued keeping her detailed journal, but now it was part of her official duties rather than a personal quirk that others found amusing. Captain Hayes called her into his office 1 month after the Fletcher incident. "Private Walsh, I wanted to update you on the results of your transfer to intelligence analysis. Your supervisor tells me you've identified 3 additional security vulnerabilities and 2 personnel issues that warranted investigation." Emma nodded. "Yes, sir. I've been working with Lieutenant Stevens to develop a systematic approach to observation and analysis. We're creating a comprehensive assessment of base operations that should help prevent future security breaches." Hayes smiled. "Outstanding work, Private. Your journal may have started as a personal project, but it's evolved into a valuable intelligence resource. You've proven that sometimes the most important insights come from simply paying attention to what's happening around us." As Emma left the captain's office, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that embarrassing day when Jake Morrison had read from her journal in front of everyone. The same detailed observations that had made her the target of jokes and ridicule had ultimately revealed her true calling and earned her the respect of her commanding officers. Emma continued to carry her leather journal everywhere she went, but now she carried it with pride rather than embarrassment. She had learned that being different wasn't necessarily a weakness, and that the qualities that made her stand out from her peers could also make her valuable in ways she had never imagined. The investigation into Fletcher's activities revealed that he had been selling classified information for 6 months, compromising multiple ongoing operations and putting lives at risk. Without Emma's observational skills and detailed record-keeping, he might have continued his espionage indefinitely, causing incalculable damage to national security. Years later, when Emma had advanced to the rank of Petty Officer Second Class and was leading her own intelligence analysis team, she would tell new recruits about the importance of paying attention to details that others might overlook. She would explain that intelligence work wasn't just about analyzing classified reports and satellite imagery, but about noticing the small things that revealed larger truths. Her journal had taught her that every detail mattered, every observation had potential value, and every person had unique perspectives that could contribute to the larger mission. What had started as a personal habit of recording her thoughts and experiences had evolved into a career dedicated to protecting national security through careful observation and analysis. The leather journal that had once been a source of embarrassment had become the foundation of Emma's professional success, proving that sometimes the things that make us different are exactly the things that make us valuable.